I'm Osman Faruqi, and this is The Drop, a culture show from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, where we dive into the latest in the world of pop culture and entertainment. I'm here with Mel Cambry and Thomas Mitchell. Gang, what is up? It's been a couple of weeks since we're all together. How you guys doing?
Yeah, good. Good to be back together. Missed you guys.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a while since it's been the three of us, so this is great.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't changed since the last time we spoke a few weeks ago is that the New South Wales Blues are on the cusp of getting absolutely destroyed yet again. An Origin, again, by the time this is out, you will know what the score is. We don't know what it is. Thomas, you were saying that you feel slightly optimistic because Latrell is back in the squad.
I do. As you said, it'll probably come back to haunt me. But, I don't know. I follow Latrell on Instagram, and just the vibe of his stories this week has been good. Like, it seems like a good vibe in camp. He's having lots of tea. That's been his big thing.
He's drinking a lot of tea? That's what you're hanging your hopes on?
I mean, fuck, man, it's pretty desperate times, all right? So, but yeah, last time I think I picked the Blues by 4 and we got absolutely flogged. So this time I'm going Blues by 20 plus.
Wow, that's huge.
So anyway, just watch this space, guys.
I like when you put money down because it gives the game some kind of level of stake for me.
Yeah,
so I appreciate that you're putting your money on it.
Maybe we should go in all three.
Yeah, it's better when it's your money.
I mean, his mental health is a big factor on how good you feel during the day. Isn't
Correct.
That right,
I thought you were going to say when you said one thing that hasn't changed is that we still don't have a good answer for you when you say, how have you been this week?
Our wonderful producer, Chi, will probably tidy up the awkward gap, but you both just stare at each other in shock that I asked you the same question I ask you every single week.
We're always so disappointing. I feel like we always disappoint you.
I'm mostly focused on like the different ways that you say this is the drop. I just get so zeroed in on that. And so then after that happens, I just zone out for like 10 seconds.
I'm a pro man. I bring the A game to the introduction. Let's get on with it. Today on the show, we got something very exciting. Austin Butler is on the podcast. He's a star of the new film The Bikeriders, which is out next week. It also stars Jodie Comer and Tom Hardy. I spoke to Austin about the film, his recent performances in June and Elvis, and we had a really fun conversation about the state of cinema more generally and why it's important for people to go to the movies and make sure that we have movies in the future. There are two different topics we're going to get into before we play you that conversation with Austin. In the second half of today's episode, we're going to talk about the fascinating moment that is happening in pop music right now. There's actually a lot going on, from The Lord and Charli XCX remix and what that means for musical feuds and collaborations going forward, but also on a much broader scale, the breakthrough success of artists like Chappell Roan, Sabrina Carpenter, Tinashe, artists who've been making music for a very long time and are finally achieving commercial success, even in a year that's been dominated by the big three of Taylor, Beyonce, and Billie. There's a lot to discuss about what's going on in the musical landscape right now. But first, the Logie nominations were announced this week. We covered the awards last year, kind of made the case that even if you're a bit cynical about these award ceremonies and the state of Australian television, they're worth paying attention to because they are a barometer of what's going on in Australian TV in the industry right now. So we decided we'd take a look at the nominations this year and do our own temperature check on what's happening in Australian TV and maybe even make some predictions that hopefully will be more accurate than Thomas's predictions on the rugby league. Thomas, I'm going to get your help for this one. You are famously the Logies guy in this office, in this podcast, in this country, really. This year, the awards are being done a little bit differently to the way they've operated for, I think, like most of their history. There are new categories, there's a new judging system. Can you kind of break down what is different about the Logie Awards in 2024?
Yes, I'm just going to go and update my Instagram bio to the Logies guy in this country.
Your Gold Logie campaign starts today.
Correct. Yeah, it's a title I've been coveting for some time.
I think it started last year when we talked about this. I have a vague memory that we sort of thought that by this time next year, Thomas and I would somehow be Logie nominated.
Either be Logie nominated or writing the Logie show, which I still think we probably should be tapped to do. Sadly, the broadcast is no longer with the Great Nine Network. Anyway, all of that aside, yes, so there are some big changes this year, and it's actually been really reflected in what the nominations look like. So previously, the awards were split into most popular, which was a fan-voted award. So that was kind of, across everything, all the way up to the gold and comedy, drama, reality, and then the same awards were mirrored in the most outstanding, which was an industry voted award. And that's been the case since, forever, as you said. Now it's been combined. So the awards are all known as the best. So best actor, best actress in a drama, best actor in a comedy. And they are going to be decided by a combined score. So it'll be a score determined by assessment criteria, a supplied audience data, and then public votes. So it'll be like a mesh of what the industry thinks and what the public thinks, and then how the shows fit into the assessment criteria. So that really changes things. It's no longer going to be this kind of popularity contest awards versus, what the industry thinks. And I guess the point of that is to settle on a really more reflective best winner, which I think is actually a really good thing. And generally, I think people are excited about that. There's also been some changes in terms of the actual awards. So they finally decided to separate the comedy and drama in the acting categories. So previously, it was just like best actor, and you would have people from comedies and dramas up against each other, whereas now that's completely separate, which is kind of like what the Emmy Awards does. So yeah, basically we're looking at a brand new Logies for the 64th Annual Logie Awards. It's happening in August. It's happening again in Sydney. It moved to Sydney last year, and it will be broadcast on 7. So I guess it's, the Logies for a long time, as we've done on this very podcast, has been probably criticized as a strange, convoluted reflection of basically what people who still watch free-to-air think maybe. And that's always been the criticism, and perhaps why people are a little bit indifferent. Whereas this change, I think, is the Logies being like, look, we've heard you, and now the entire criteria is a mix of all these different things, and therefore delivers a winner that makes more sense to people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. Thank you. And also, I think it makes a lot of sense. Like having those awards separated in popular versus best was just very confusing for people. And like you said, separating out comedy and drama also makes a lot of sense. Like, how do you compare dramatic and comedic performances? Though obviously, and I'm sure this will be the case, you still get these funny shows that end up in weird categories like you do with the Logies. People like The Bear is in comedy, and there's bits of it that are funny, but it's also one of the most emotionally intense and dramatic shows on TV right now. But at least there's some attempt to look at what award shows are doing elsewhere and how the Logies can, I guess, mirror them in good ways. I'm interested in what the viewership data being an input into the awards means, because we obviously don't really know the numbers on streaming platforms. Do you have any insight into that? Have streaming platforms been asked to provide viewership data for this Logies process?
I believe they have, actually. And I think you can really then see the results of that, because if you have a look at particularly the acting categories Logies, so for lead actor, lead actress in comedy and drama, as well as supporting, it is stacked with streamers. So I think that's really played a part. And and generally it's a huge year for streaming. And again, I think we're seeing this shift in terms of who has been nominated. I guess firstly, in terms of some of the big surprises or the big stories coming out of the initial nominations, Boy Swallows Universe was the most successful individual show. Obviously, that was a Netflix Australian production. And that was a huge success story generally, I think, for Australia. It trended all over the world. That's got 8 Best nominations, as well as 2 Graham Kennedy Awards for the most popular new talent for Felix Cameron and Lee Tiger Halley. So that was kind of the big story coming out. Also, the ABC, it's an interesting time for the ABC generally, but in terms of its nominations, it's a record year. They got 51 nominations, as well as Tony Armstrong being nominated for his first gold Logie. But, we've seen they've got 17 out of 20 best categories they're nominated in. And it's kind of spread both across drama and comedy. The Newsreader got a bunch, Total Control, Mother and Son, In Limbo, as well as kind of the usual suspects who get nominated every year, like The Gruins, Hard Quiz, The Yearly with Charlie Pickering. So I do think that the new criteria has fed into what the makeup looks like this year. I think it's the first year that Home and Away doesn't really have any acting nominations. That does not happen at the Logies. That is just So yeah, the changes seem to be working in the correct way. So yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, it does seem like the winners here, like you said, Netflix with Boy Swallows Universe and the ABC. I feel like that trend, that story that the Logies tell us about what's been happening in Australian TV the last 12 months or so, streamers and the ABC investing in comedy and drama, and perhaps the free-to-air networks not doing it as much, or at least not doing it in ways that are being critically or commercially as well received. I think across the 24 nominees in acting across drama and comedy, only one is from a free-to-air network, which is Rob Collins in RFDS from Seven. Rob Collins actually nominated twice in the Best Lead Actor category, one for Royal Flying Doctor Service and one for the ABC's Total Control. So good on him. I didn't know you could do that, but that's pretty cool to have him twice. I wonder if he's going to split his own vote.
I always enjoy seeing when someone is up against themselves in a category.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I also picked that out as a pretty like insane thing. Like that, I think, you know, if you add up all those different nominations, there's like over 20 nominations and only one single commercial free-to-air show in Royal Flying Doctor Service. I guess it also speaks to this increasing trend that when we do have the 7, 9, 10 investing in like local drama especially, it's like it is a mini series. It's, you know, your underbellies, like that type of thing. It's not the long running drama. And so if you have a look at the mini series category, which has also been separated out this year, there are more commercial free-to-air networks. But yeah, I guess it is a pretty damning indictment of what we discuss every year whenever the networks do their upfronts, is that increasingly you just don't see the commercial free-to-air networks investing in local comedy and drama. It's just not what they do, and the streamers have really plugged that gap, and you know, that's what we see. But sadly, it shouldn't really be that way, and hopefully Rob Collins takes it out for Royal Flying Doctor Service. Yeah,
I think it is kind of a reflection of the complete shift of original Australian content moving to streaming channels, and also the choice that networks are making, because a lot of these networks are associated with streaming. Network 10 with Paramount, 9 obviously with Stan, and they're really solidifying their free-to-air for reality TV shows, which is an interesting shift, which we've seen has been happening for a while. But yeah, when you're looking at the Logies nominations, you can really see the Primes, the Netflixes dominating on there, and Binge as well.
Yeah, reality is the inverse of this conversation, which is dominated by free-to-air stuff, reality and lifestyle, I guess. So shows like Travel Guides on 9, Better Homes and Gardens on 7. And then, yeah, with reality, it's Alone on SBS, Survivor on 10, I'm a Celebrity on 10, MasterChef on 10, Lego Masters on 9, The Block on 9. So that is seemingly the new TV landscape, reality on free-to-air and drama and scripted comedy on streaming and on the ABC. But as you pointed out, Mel, like some of these streamers like Stan, which has picked up a swag of nominees, are part of 9 as well. So it just seems to perhaps be a reflection of the way that audiences are consuming stuff and who's watching online and who's watching on appointment free-to-air stuff. Like it makes sense that reality is maybe overrepresented on free-to-air because that is still appointment viewing. You watch MasterChef at this time, so then you can talk about it the next day. Whereas for drama and comedy, people just want to watch that at their whim online. The other one that I thought was interesting and is like, honestly, frankly, a little bit sad, Best Children's Program. And you know, ABC deserves props here for having 5 out of the 6 nominees. The only other one being from NITV and Netflix, Eddie's Little Homies. There was a era, including the one that we all grew up in, where the major commercial networks were investing a lot in children's TV shows, scripted dramas, all sorts of shows like that. It's just, and this has been borne out in reports done by the Australian Children's Television Foundation. There's just not the level of investment in children's TV that there used to be in Australia. And it's so interesting having the Logies as a kind of a data point for that as well.
Yeah, I feel like, and we talked about this with the budget as well, where there was a investment into children's TV. I feel like ABC has come to dominate that so convincingly that maybe other networks are moving away from it. But it is a shame because Bluey, one of our most successful cultural exports, has shown the power of children's television to travel internationally. So it is a shame, but yeah, very clear stronghold on that from the ABC.
It'll be interesting to see if Bluey, which was famously beaten last year, in quite a shock, will bounce back. I'm sure it probably will. I feel like it's been another big year for Bluey with a batch of new episodes. But yeah, I guess like going back to that, of course, all these streamers have associations with different networks, Stan and 9 and stuff. But it's weird, like if you just don't have, the capacity to have a bunch of streaming in your, like monthly budget, you just don't get to watch any Australian drama. Like, I mean, yeah, you can, we've done some stories recently on our colleagues who have only watched 10 Play for a month or only watch SBS On Demand. You can go and watch old seasons of great Australian drama. But yeah, it's kind of weird. It's basically if you want to watch new Australian drama or comedy, then you have to definitely make sure that you're paying, $10 a month extra on top of all the other bills you pay.
Yeah, that's so true. And also I think a lot of these shows, which are really great, something like Deadlock had a lot of cut through, but it was on Prime Video, which is still a relatively smaller streaming platform in Australia still. And a show like that could have potentially had far more import if it was on a streamer with more subscribers, or if it was potentially on ABC, which everyone has access to. So it is kind of, and we've obviously discussed this a bit before about how, the segmenting of the market will affect how different shows are received.
I wish I'd done the numbers on this before, but if you wanted to watch everything nominated for a Logie, you'd have to have Paramount Plus, Amazon, Disney Plus, Netflix, Stan, Binge. That is a lot of money. And, the era that we were growing up in, you would have free-to-air. That would be overwhelmingly all of the Logies, and then maybe Foxtel for some of those prestige shows. So that's the other side to this as well. Like, cost of living is impacting the kinds of Australian stories people can access. It's a good point, Thomas, that if you can't afford all these things, you still probably deserve Australian stories as well. Let's get to the Gold Logie. This is probably one that, even if people don't necessarily care about who wins Best Miniseries or Telemovie, they'll be across the Gold Logie race. Break that one down for us, Thomas. Who's nominated? What are the surprises here?
Yes, it's an interesting mix this year. So I guess we'll go with the nominees first. As I mentioned, Tony Armstrong nominated for his first ever Gold Logie. He's, one of the bright young hopes for the ABC and very, very popular, obviously. He's actually on a hat trick, having won the Graham Kennedy Award in 2022, the most popular new talent in 2023, and then now looking at the Gold Logie. And both of those awards are publicly voted. So, there is a trend of people voting for Tony. So he's really, really in the mix.
I just got to say, as an aside, I love the fact that you are commentating this like it's a live sports
yeah, you were calling it.
Tournament. It's really, really good.
And then alongside him, we have Andy Lee. So weirdly, people were like, oh my God, Hamish Blake, who is, a two-time Gold Logie winner, won in 2022, was beaten by Sonia Kruger last year, but everyone thought he would be in the mix. He isn't. Instead, Andy Lee gets his first shot at gold. And then we also have Asher Keddy, Julia Morris for I'm a Celeb, Larry Emder, also a first-time Gold Logie nominee, Robert Irwin, again, another first-timer for I'm a Celeb, and then last year's winner, Sonia Kruger, is in the mix too. Now, it is an interesting batch of people because you have a whole lot of stuff going on. You've got previous winners in Sonia Kruger and Asher Keddy. You've got previous multiple nominees in Julia Morris. I think this is the third year she's been nominated in a row without winning. And then you do have these first-timers in Andy, Larry Emder, Robert, and Tony Armstrong. So it's a funny race because at very first glance, you're like, okay, maybe there's a chance anyone can win. We wrote about this earlier this week. I really believe that it's a 3-horse race between Larry Emder, Tony Armstrong, and Robert Irwin. I think they each have kind of like viable shots at going the distance. But what I think is so weird is that last year we saw Sonia basically, I guess, perhaps surprisingly beat Hamish off the back of a very strong campaign from Channel 7 to get her there. I think the same thing will happen again this year with Larry. I mean, I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts, obviously not being as enmeshed in Logie's culture. What was your kind of like instant reaction to seeing the list?
Sorry, could I ask, and I had a little hand raised before, I just wanted some clarification, please, on do you win the Gold Logie based on the performance of that year? I.e., is Robert Irwin going to get it based on I'm a Celeb, or do you take into consideration all their kind of historic roles up to this moment?
Also, the Gold Logie will just be publicly voted.
Okay.
So this one, I guess you could make the argument, still remains like who can basically galvanize people that like them the most to vote. And which is why the biggest conversation that I'm seeing so far is I feel like people have accepted that Tony is a worthy nominee and definitely in with a shot. And then the two other chances are like Robert Irwin and Larry Emder, who represent two very Larry has been on TV for 5,000 years. He's hosted 1 million shows. He currently hosts 2 daily shows in The Chase and The Morning Show. And I guess people are like, he makes sense. And then you've got Robert Irwin. We all love the Irwin family. They, hold a special place in the Australian cultural landscape. But Robert Irwin hosted 1 season of I'm a Celeb. He did a pretty good job, whatever. The ratings weren't amazing, and yet he's in this gold race. And not only in the gold race, he and Larry are kind of according to the online bookies, way up there. It's him, Tony, and Larry are all under $4. They're the favorites.
And he's also up against his co-host, Julia Morris, because I thought maybe they just needed to make sure there's representation from across all the networks. I feel like what's interesting about this is that this is one where streaming hasn't really impacted the race, and I'm not quite sure what the obvious streaming person would be in this. But I mean, if Asher Keddy Oh, actually, no, I guess Asher Ketty was in Strife, which was a binge show. But I'm sort of surprised that maybe there isn't like a Heartbreak High or a Boy Swallows in this, considering how popular those shows have been, particularly for like a younger audience that might not be as plugged into some of these others, like Sonia Kruger. I think it's interesting that Tony's nominated. I think it makes sense given he keeps winning these awards that are popularly voted on. It's pretty amazing. He's not really been on television for a long time to be a Gold Logie nominee relatively early in his TV career. It's quite an extraordinary hat tip to him. I think you're right that it's Larry, Rob, and Tony. Though that said, I mean the Logies love repeat winners. Like there's so many examples where people win. Like the 90s are wild. Ray Martin won in 93, 94, and 95 and 96. And then Lisa McCune won 97, 98, 99, 2000. Like that is the entire 90s. There were only two winners, Ray Martin and Lisa McCune.
Yeah, and what a pair. Yeah, but I mean, obviously this won't shock you. Things are very different now than they were in the 90s. And, you know, obviously that was when you would literally buy your TV Week magazine and fill out the thing and fucking mail it in. Like, whereas now, obviously, it's online voting. But what I think I mean, I obviously can't speak for Logie's organisers, but I have previously worked at TV Week and I reckon they would be like praying that Larry Emder wins, because I think if Robert Irwin was to win, it does like undermine the legitimacy and I guess like the prestige around the Gold Logie. Like, you know, the reality is the guy is like 20 something. He's been on TV for 2 minutes and like, what does that say about the award if Robert Irwin was to win and be, you know, declared the most popular person on Australian TV when he's hosted one single season of I'm a Celeb, let alone someone should do a welfare check on Dr. Chris Brown, who hosted the show for like 10 years, never got a nomination.
What does it say? I think maybe it says that they need to continue to revisit how they judge these awards. I feel like, okay, I'm going to go with a dark horse. I reckon if it's completely popularly voted, Tony Armstrong, ABC viewers love him. A certain kind of person loves Tony Armstrong, but they're not the type of person who really cares about the Logies and they're not going online to vote, not the ABC audience. Robert Irwin, big fan base, but I don't know, young.
6 million Instagram followers.
Yeah, so he could activate his fans and they could vote, but I kind of feel like maybe they're not that interested in the Logies either. Asher Ketty, she's the sweet spot. I know she's won before, but repeat winners. The people who love Asher Ketty also love the Logies, and they are also the kind of person who I reckon gets online and votes for their girl.
I love how you did not even know how these awards were decided 5 minutes ago, and you were so authoritative in declaring. But you're right. I mean, there is a latent Australian love for Asher Ketty. I think the only thing I would say in response to that is her show Strife wasn't like a huge hit either critically or commercially, and I think I 100% agree with you that the ABC audience who love Tony are also the kinds of folk who traditionally probably don't take the cues to vote. But this year, as we've discussed, there are so many ABC shows nominated, and the ABC is under so much scrutiny and pressure, including from people like us, about what it's doing, what its future is, that I think if I was the ABC, I would actually go all out. I would say this is our year where the commercial free-to-air networks seem to be struggling a little bit. We've got so many nominations. We've got our chance at a Gold Logie for the first time. That isn't a joke campaign. Like Tom Gleeson, we could actually win the gold. We could win like 30 Logies here potentially. Let's actually mobilize our audience and do it. That's what I would do if I was the ABC. Whether or not the audience responds, I'm not sure. For that reason, I think ultimately Thomas is right that Larry is probably in a really good spot because he's got the combination of being someone who lots of Australians know because he's been around for a long time. He's generally well-liked. He's got a bigger social following, though not by much, than Tony Armstrong. And Seven can mobilize behind him the way they did for Sonia Kruger last year. So I think there's a lot of factors suggesting that Larry might be able to take this one out.
And also I think, that the people who love, he's got 171,000 followers on Instagram versus Robert Irwin's 6 million. That's absolutely no contest. But the people who love and follow Larry are so committed, versus what, Robert Irwin's probably very youngish fan base. I don't know, even if he puts out a few stories like, hey, vote for me, link in bio, I don't know if the amount of traction he'll actually get off that. Whereas I know, having also previously worked at the morning show as a producer with Larry. I know what that audience is like. They're used to engaging with the show. They buy shit from advertorials. They constantly enter competitions to get a cruise to Fiji. Like, they will sit and watch that show for 3 hours every day and text in and spend money. And like, that is a viewer behavior that they're used to. So like, and already it's beginning. Like, Seven is going all out. Sonia is like an afterthought this year. That's my opinion. Like, all of the Seven talent has been flogging Larry already. Like, they will be behind him. And, you know, it's funny, like, I texted you last night, Osman, to be like, fuck, like, you should see, like, Larry's odds from them, even before when they announced, like, he was in the mix, his odds were, like, really high, and I should have fucking got on him then, but I didn't. Cut this out if I can't talk about gambling. But now, like, in the last 24 hours, he has shortened so much. It's like he and Tony are the favourites with Robert just behind.
But
like,
is that because you wrote a story?
I mean, it'll probably shorten even further after people listen to this conversation. So if you didn't put your money on, you're probably even
I feel like you wrote a story
now.
saying he was a favourite and then he became a favourite.
I mean, I have long suspected that I have the ear of the nation, and that was confirmation, which
Well, the ear of the nation or the ear of the 14 people betting on the Logie Awards.
But yeah, anyway, that's my tip. Play this back in August when he wins, and you guys can just like give me a nice cheer.
Look, I'm glad we had that conversation because we get a little bit of feedback sometimes that, you know, we talk about these big American shows and American films, and there's lots of interesting stuff happening in Australia. I think that's like a fair shout. It's good to take the time to do a bit of a temp check on what is happening in Australian television, the good and the things that maybe are being missed a bit. But I'm really interested. I'm really interested to see how many people engage with the Logies this year, given that they are trying to encompass a wider range of shows and a wider range of, you know, streaming platforms. And like we always say about these awards, they're not the only thing that matters, absolutely not, but they are a reflection of how a decent chunk of the community and the industry think about how things are going right now. So it's worth talking about.
And I think personally, like the ceremony will be in August. It will be on 7. And I think I'm excited to see Sam Pang back as host. He has a lot of material to work with from a insane year for all of the major TV networks, you know, culturally, socially, and everything that's been going on. Hopefully he's like got a red hot cold opener.
Yeah, then he deserves the gold Logie too.
Well, actually, he was. I mean, I hate to keep talking about gambling. He was like before the nominations were announced. He was in the mix as a really short odd, and then he didn't get a nomination.
I mean, amazing if he gets nominated for his performance hosting the Logies every year. That would be incredible.
This is another thing, just quickly worth mentioning. Lots of people don't know is that you have to actually put yourself forward for the gold, which is why initially people were like, "Oh my god, Hamish Blake snubbed." But like, I think I said this last year. I would get a tattoo of a Logie if I was wrong. I guarantee he said, don't put me forward, because like I feel like last year the general vibe from Hamish was like, I don't want to win this again. Then Sonia did that weird acceptance speech where she like, I don't know, kind of lit him up. But then like I think Hamish was like, I don't want to be involved this year. So I suspect he didn't put himself forward. And also then you've now got Andy having a shot, and I'm sure Hamish will like do a big campaign for him. So yeah, interesting times.
You need to get a tattoo of a Logie anyway.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have a tattoo of a Logie.
Well, maybe, okay, like if Larry doesn't win, I'll get one.
I've never seen him this animated.
I've never seen you know so much before.
Mate, this is my fucking mastermind subject.
I'm like shocked.
Me talking about the Logies on Mastermind will finally get me the Logie nomination. I've so long.
All right, from your Rain Man subject to Mel's Rain Man subject, pop music, baby. I'm really keen to have a pretty wide-ranging discussion with you guys about what's going on in music right now, because I think it is utterly fascinating and it feels extremely, extremely significant. But before we do that, I kind of think it's worth discussing the Charli XCX Lorde situation first, because that's one we haven't had time to get into. It became like a big cultural moment last week. Mel, we spoke about the Charli album Brat with Meg a couple of weeks ago and how that song, Girl So Confusing, was very likely about Lorde. Can you talk us through a little bit about what Charli was singing about and what happened last week to get everyone so worked up?
Yeah, this song, Girl So Confusing, is about a complicated relationship with a female musician, and the public immediately thought that Charli XCX was talking about Lorde because, you know, she talks about we've got the same hair, we talk about making music, people say we're alike, which is something that's been said of both Lorde and Charli XCX, that they're like each other. And she talks about how strained this relationship is and rife with miscommunications. And everyone started speculating who it was about, and then completely taking control of the narrative, Charli XCX and Lorde decided to work it out on the remix and released this fabulous remixed version of Girl So Confusing, where they essentially speak to their relationship and their different confusions about it. One of the things I found really interesting, we haven't heard heaps from Lorde lately. She's kind of moved to London, we know that, but hasn't been releasing music, has been off social media, and she has this really kind of vulnerable verse on it.
For the last couple years, I've been at war in my body. I tried to starve myself thinner, and then I gained all the way back. I was trapped in the hatred, and your life seemed so awesome. I never thought for a second my voice was in your head, girl.
It's quite a very vulnerable verse, and it's great to hear Lorde kind of back making music. But I think, you know, this whole remix, I mean, obviously I would think that Lorde was in on it the whole time and that she would have been across and this was planned, that they would release this song together.
That's classic Mel Emery.
Well, obviously, you can't just spontaneously make music. Like, but I don't think that changes anything about it, that they planned it.
I didn't think that. That wasn't my first. I mean, I'm probably more of a sucker. I don't know. What do you think?
I have a bit of intelligence on this one. So
here he comes.
Friend of the pod, Shad D'Souza, who wrote that amazing Face Magazine cover feature on Charli a few months ago that I think I shouted out, obviously spent a lot of time with Charli. I think has gotten to know Charli quite well. At least the tension between the two of them is like 100% real. And that is something that has been plaguing, I guess, Charli for a while. And I don't know whether the first Lorde heard about this track was when the album was released. Because what's interesting to remember as well is that Lorde was very quick to go to the show and to say how good it was. I have a feeling that Charli just wrote this song, didn't talk to Lorde about it, but maybe gave Lorde a heads up that this track is coming. And then that's when the wheels started to turn on this. So I guess it's a little bit of both. It's like genuinely Charli organically expressing her feelings about something. And she's done that a bit on this record. Like there's a track that everyone thinks is about Taylor Swift and whatever. And then Lorde, I think, came up with her own idea to, hey, this would be really interesting if we, quote, unquote, worked it out on the remix. It's a really fascinating thing because it seems to have happened pretty quickly and pretty organically. And the vulnerability that they both expose on this track is a bit surprising. It's like almost, even if there is an element of musical cynicism because it helps boost, you know, the album's placement in the charts and whatever, it's just so raw and honest that supersedes anything to do with its success and how it's in the zeitgeist. You have Lorde talking about, her body, about how she feels about cancelling on Charli. It doesn't feel cynical to me.
No, and me saying that they worked on it together is not about cynicism. It's just the reality of like...
You mean the actual execution and delivery of the
track?
track?
I don't think it makes it any less inauthentic that they decided to do this and release this song. But I completely agree with Oz. I think she probably gave her the heads up as a courtesy, and then Lorde said, well, why don't I feature on it? And what I now want to see is a Taylor remix of Sympathy is a Knife, which is the Charli XCX song about Taylor Swift. So now I'm hoping Taylor's going to pop on.
No, what we all really want to see is Drake and Kendrick work it out on the remix.
Yeah.
But I did think this is...
No one wants to see either of those two things, just for the record.
But I did think in the context of this year that's been like so dominated musically by this whole like, you know, narrative around feuds and like the Drake and Kendrick thing, which I think, like, just as an aside, seems increasingly ridiculous, like with more distance. I don't know, like, you know, I know Kendrick is the winner and he had that big pop-out show and stuff, but the more I listen to those songs, I'm like, I can't believe this happened. And anyway, but particularly then you see something like this and it's such an interesting way to like approach, you know, the feud that's become this construct in music these days. And particularly I thought what was so great was, you know, we're in this era, I think Pitchfork mentioned it, of like calling it detective pop, of which, you know, our Lord and Savior Taylor Swift is kind of leading that, where, you know, you write these pop music songs and they're full of Easter eggs and your fans like lose their minds trying to figure out what's going on. And this like seemed like that. And then instead of like leaving us all to speculate and like this, you know, churning of ideas and negativity and, oh, is it about this person? Is it about that person? Instead, they just like got on a new remix of the song and like blew everyone away in the nicest way possible. I thought it was just like such a, aside from the song being great and, you know, a kind of reflection of why the album is so good, it was in such an interesting and smart way to like nullify this, you know, story that was brewing and also create a new moment for the album, which is already dominating, you know, pop culture anyway.
Yeah, totally. I feel like there's a real self-reflexiveness and self-awareness about it because female pop stars are like historically obviously pitted up against each other. There can only be one, like, you know, Britney and Christina, Katie and Taylor. And so I think that this is completely reclaiming that feud narrative. And this is about, you know, female pop-driven reconciliation and female pop stars building each other up, which is extending beyond this song as well.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, Thomas, about the detective pop of it, I think unless you were like very frequent in the London club scene in the past 12 to 18 months, you probably had no idea that there was like this Charli Lorde feud. So it wasn't something that had been seeded already. And I think we spoke about this when the album was first released. I think unlike something like Tortured Poets Department, the album, sure, it has some biographical elements to it, but it works just on a level of being a good album. It doesn't need you to just pass everything through. Who was this song about? Oh my God, I can't believe we're finding out about this relationship and this breakup. I think Tortured Poets kind of entirely rests on people caring a lot about that stuff. I think the Charli record has some of that stuff, but just is a really fun, brash, dancey kind of progressive pop album on its own, without needing deep knowledge or lore about what's going on in Charli's life.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's what I liked so much about it. Like, I think, you know, we are in this funny era of, you know, like that detective pop, but also it feels like lots of these artists are going through this like movement where they're like, okay, the way to connect with the audience is to present myself as like really, you know, like just like you and like salt of the earth and really authentic and vulnerable. And that's kind of the current trend. And I feel like although there is lots of that in Brat, it's not like posturing to do that. It's very much just like, this is my weird life and these are the things I do and these are the anxieties I have and all my different neuroses. But I don't feel like Charli's like really trying to make us convinced that she's one of us.
I think, yeah, that's a really good point because the or shucks thing that Taylor does, it just always has more and more recently felt hollow because she's not like us. Like, you know, maybe she has some anxieties that we share, like maybe, but she's not like us. I don't know how much Charli is like us either, but when she talks about her life and even on that track with Lorde, when they're talking about the way they are misinterpreting each other and the public messages they send versus how they feel inwardly, like that can apply to any human's relationship. Like that actually feels more relatable and more vulnerable than someone getting on stage and saying, I get it. I was once like a young teenage girl who was worried about guys like you. That feels a bit put on, whereas the way that Charli and Lorde are doing it doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum, and I almost think, while it makes sense to compare them, I think their artistic projects are very different, and you would put like Charli XCX and Chappell Roan at one end of the pop spectrum, which is very avant-garde pop, and Taylor at the other end of the spectrum. So I guess I think they're hitting different points intentionally. So I almost think, yeah, it makes sense to compare them, but really I think Charli and Chappell Roan are the next development of pop because Taylor has dominated the landscape for so long, and as we know, culture moves forward when there's a reaction against, you know, what came before. So I think we're seeing the future of pop versus kind of what we have had or what has dominated for the last few years.
Yeah, let's have that broader conversation because I think the artists that you're talking about thriving both because of Taylor Swift and the work that she's done, and as a reaction against the sheer dominance of her sound at the moment too. I think this wave of artists have a lot in common. So Charli, you mentioned Chappell Roan, Sabrina Carpenter, Tinashe. What's interesting about them is they've been making music for a very long time, all of these artists, but it's only now that they are starting to get really big commercial success and charting in a big way. Last year, Shah D'Souza, who we mentioned, wrote a really interesting piece for the New York Times examining what they called the middle-class pop star. And this is a generation of artists, including all of those that I just mentioned, who burst into the scene maybe like a decade ago, had a couple of successful hits, but then, even though they kept releasing albums and even albums that were really critically well received, they never managed to get big hits. They never managed to chart or sell out stadiums. They were just kind of grinding away, making a living, waiting for that wave that they could ride. And Charli is a really good example of this. Last year, her track Speed Drive, which is for the Barbie soundtrack, was actually her first single to chart in the US in a decade, which is kind of crazy. And obviously since then, she's gone on with all the success that Brat has had. Chappell Roan, another example, she's been making music for 7 years. She was signed to a major label and then dropped. She finally has a commercial hit with her recent single, Good Luck Babe. I think that single, plus her tour, plus being an opener for Olivia Rodrigo, has helped grow her fan base. And her album that was actually released 9 months ago, Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess, is charting now. I feel like we haven't really seen that before. I think in some ways that's as impressive, if not more impressive, than what Charli is doing, because she's been grinding. This record is not new, but now people are talking about it, and all these outlets that didn't review it 9 months ago have been like, oh, this great album came out. We should actually talk about it. For the record, we did talk about it 9 months ago. We did interview Chappell Roan, didn't we, Mel?
We sure did. And she was not a big deal then. And I think, well, not as big a deal as she is now. I think her touring with Olivia Rodrigo as well put her in front of a whole lot of key audience for her.
And I guess the other one in that category is Sabrina Carpenter, who was the Australian opener for Taylor Swift and made the most of it with her fun and cute little outros. She's released 5 albums over 10 years, but got her first top 10 hit with Espresso just this year, followed up with Please, 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 which went number 1. That's pretty extraordinary. Tinashe, who's been making music for a decade, is finally charting with her recent single, Nasty. This is a really interesting moment, and I don't want to discuss it all in the context of Taylor Swift, because I think we talk about Taylor a lot, but it's hard to not talk about like a generation of female pop stars without talking about the big ones there. And I agree with you, Mel, that they're not doing the same things, which is, I think, why these guys are finding so much success. Like, I think Taylor did 2 things. She managed to convince a generation of young people post-COVID that going out and seeing live shows is really fun and really exciting. And I think that has probably helped kickstart people's interest in going to see Sabrina and Olivia and Chappell and this other generation too. And she's probably pushed this idea of fun, wild shows are a thing for young people to do, not just sit at home on TikTok and stream music, but also her sound. And I think this applies to like Olivia and Billie Eilish as well. So to broaden out those kind of big 3 that have dominated pop for the last few years, it's very ballady, it's very flat. That kind of Jack Antonoff production that is dominated a lot of the pop sound. It's not particularly dancey. It's not particularly sexy. It's not particularly fun. And I think people have clearly been craving that sense of, I want to go and like get sweaty and lose it a little bit. And I think what Charli and Chappell and even Sabrina have, even if it's not all in the music, it is in the lyrics. Like, it's a bit sexier. It's a bit more raw. It's a bit more kind of like intimate and, yeah, maybe horny even. I think that space has existed as a vacuum there, and these guys have both benefited from like the tailwind, if you will, that Taylor's created, and filled that gap with a very different sound that used to dominate pop, like the Britney Christina thing, and these guys have found their new way of doing it. That's sort of my take as to why they seem to be achieving commercial success when they've just been grinding for such a long time, because it's not like they came out of nowhere. They've been working. It's more their huge reception they're getting now that is the interesting and noteworthy thing.
Yeah, and I think actually Charli XCX's album name Brat kind of puts its finger on what these singers that we're talking about are doing. There's kind of a revelry in the brattiness. There's a funniness, a theatricality, a nastiness to it all in a good way. And I do think that is a reaction against, you know, what we have seen as before. They're owning the brattiness, and that's why a lot of these songs are so fun and they're so delightful.
Yeah, I feel like with like Sabrina Carpenter, she has that kind of more like all-American like brattiness, but like it's so all of her like her lyrics and her even like, you know, people obviously lost their minds over the video with Barry Keoghan, but like the whole way that she's been marketed basically since that Eras tour, which like I guess really exploded her. It just feels like you know that she doesn't give a fuck, and so therefore you're like drawn to that.
Yeah, my only thought is, you know, I'm a fan of Sabrina. We had to get there for the nonsense outro at the Swift concert. My only thought is maybe Sabrina is a bit out of her league in this conversation. yes, she kind of is celebrating the brattiness, but I do think she is more of your standard pop star, not only in her physicality, but that she came through that Disney network. She was a Disney child star. She's Jack Antonoff produced. Please, Please, Please is a very catchy song.
It's also like, we're getting fed it guerrilla marketing style every single.
Yeah. And I don't think that I think that song needed Barry in the film clip. Like, I think that song's pretty lucky it had such a good film clip, because I don't think it's like a particularly interesting song, as catchy as it is. So I would differentiate. I'd probably put her in a slightly different category to Billie, Eilish, and Charli XCX and Chappell Roan. Like, I think she's maybe she's the mid ground there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I also don't really love Please, 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 but I really like Espresso, and I kind of think that she's trained in that Disney world, but for her to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing when so many others would have and have given up speaks to something in her kind of character tenaciousness, her desire to just like make it work. And I think Espresso suggests a self-awareness, self-irony, a humor that does make her a little bit different to someone as like maybe earnest as Billie in her music. Like that track, like famously, like that's me, Espresso. That's the most memeable lyric of the year. People love it. I'm working late because I'm a singer, switched up like Nintendo. Like there's a fun to her that I think has helped propel her, and I think makes her, I think mid-ground is a good way of putting it. Like there's an aesthetic that is familiar if you like the more kind of staid pop stuff, and then there is a knowingness that makes it feel a bit more exciting. And
and I probably put Olivia Rodrigo a bit in that category as well.
Osman, I did want to ask, obviously Chappell Roan's having a big moment. How do you feel about the fact that she went on tour in the US and Canada with the great Vance Joy in 2017? And how much of that do you attribute to her current moment?
Probably not a lot, considering it's taken another 7 years to make it. I was like late to Chappell. I know that we had that profile on her last year, but I only really started listening to that record in the last couple of weeks. I really like it. It's really interesting. I thought it would sound more like Good Luck Babe, which I kind of enjoy, but sort of feels like a Kate Bush impersonation to me, whereas I think the album is like really fun. That opening track, Phenomenon, is one of the best opening tracks I've ever heard. And again, even though I wouldn't think about it from her aesthetic and from that song, from the single Good Luck Babe, but it's dancier. There's like a beat to it, there's a drive to it. And again, I think that is reminding us of, like Lord's Melodrama was one of the last really big dancey pop records. Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia, another really good dancey pop record. And in the 4 years since, we haven't really had something with big, fun, dancey hits. I mean, Dua Lipa's most recent album didn't really hit. I think like there was a sound people wanted to engage with, and they were hoping it would come from some of these artists, and it didn't. So they filled that gap with these others. And I kind of hope that's more the direction we go for, with more of the, just, it sounds really basic to say, but some more club dance themed pop, bringing that back, bringing that early 2000s vibe back. I think we've had enough of the guitars and the ballads. And I think particularly because hip hop is in such a state of the doldrums at the moment, and if it's going to be country and pop, can the pop at least be something that I want to, have fun to?
It's going to be funny, like in the context of all this, and obviously this new guard, and then, like kind of Taylor overseeing everything. And then July 11th, we get the new Katy Perry record, which has already had like a kind of weird reception, which I think you can actually look at as to what people, are thinking about pop music right now. Because like you've got Katy Perry, who was one of those, like, like back in the day, it was like her and Taylor, and, they kind of like dominated the landscape. She hasn't really released a record for ages. I think it's still untitled. People are calling it KP6. I think she's been working with Dr. Luke, the producer, who, famously had that whole situation with Kesha. But like, yeah, where does someone like a Katy Perry then enter into the landscape, having kind of been out of the game? And perhaps I feel like the general vibe on her is a bit like, oh, Katy Perry, like.
Yeah, I think what people have heard from the kind of first single as well is not boding well. It's already become a bit of a joke. I feel like the brattiness that we're talking about with the new current crop, the self-awareness is not there in kind of Katy Perry's, and it's a feminism that is maybe not as nuanced as what these women are exploring in their music. It is very even Raw, like really what we've heard of the new single is kind of like the song Raw. It's We Are Strong. You know, it's almost like Helen Reddy was strong, we are invincible. Like that's what she's doing, but many years later. So I think it's not going to land particularly well. Not that we've heard the album, but from what we have heard, it's not going to land particularly well in this context.
Yeah, it's so interesting the way that like contexts that music's received and are created, because we've been talking about these artists, but there's so many other artists that I feel like have been trying to play in this space for a while, and they've released amazing music and it's done well, but maybe like not popped off in the way that some of this stuff has. I think about even Troye Sivan, right? Like Rush and My Mama. These are great songs who they did really well. They got good receptions, but I almost feel like if Rush dropped now, while everyone is like just looking for that kind of club pop music, it would go ballistic. And I mean, he's touring with Charli XCX, so maybe he will end up with like the kind of massive success that I think he deserves.
Can you imagine how loose those shows will be?
Yeah, they're going to be a lot of fun. And the other one I've been thinking about is Carly Rae Jepsen, who, again, in that middle class pop tier, has just been releasing some of the best pop music ever. None of it charts, really, but she's great, and I hope that she can find a way to ride this wave too.
Ever since I first became friends with Osman, I've never met a greater Carly Rae Jepsen. He posts about her like once a week, being like, guys, don't sleep on the new Carly Rae Jepsen track. Everyone's like, man, like, call me maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met someone who has ever spoken about her to me.
She is your John Mayer.
Yeah,
and I'll happily own that because she's fucking awesome and has been slept on for like the last 10 years.
I'm going to go back and revisit, and we'll pick let's follow up next week because I'm going to go on the deep dive.
Yeah, Emotion. That's my impress your friends.
I know I wasn't there, obviously, for the Charli XCX chat, and you may have discussed this, so like, just let me know. But I mean, it's funny because her album cover is having very much a like cool book Instagram moment. Like that is. Did you discuss it at length?
No, we didn't.
But she's created a website where you can kind of generate, you know, the Brat style iconography and font and create your memes, and it's everywhere right now. Even like to the point where like political parties are using it, which has made it a bit cringe.
Yeah, and like so many people on social media have changed their like, you know, their Instagram picture to just like the lime green and their name. It's like such a genius bit of marketing. And I feel like, I think I read somewhere that previously she hadn't really tapped into her record label's marketing resources, and this is the first album where she like let them really into the process. And I mean, maybe a good shout in retrospect, because I feel like simple as it is, like the shocking lime green and just the one word, it's like, you know, when people do, including us, our pop culture roundups for the year, that the Brat cover is like one of the images of the year.
Completely dominates. Did you see that very funny thing about how for the promo for her tour, her promo poster is like made to look like a little, what might be call it, a small bag.
Of what?
Well, you could fill it with whatever you want, but the Drug Administration Board in the UK took that it was a suggestion that you might take some party drugs to the Charli XCX. So she redid the promo with a little sandwich in the bag.
Oh my God.
So
that's
good.
really funny.
Yeah.
That's the kind of marketing you can't buy when like the government's like, this is too fun, you know, tone it down. All right, before we round out the episode with my conversation with Austin, we have to do our Impress Your Friends segment where we share something we listened to, watched, read, or consumed in the world of culture. Mine is a podcast, a fellow podcast on our network, produced by our old friend, the wonderful Ruby Schwartz. It's a podcast called Trial by Water. It's hosted by investigative journalist Michael Bachelard, and it is about the Robert Farquharson conviction. He was convicted of killing his 3 children on Father's Day in 2005 by driving them into a dam. It's one of Melbourne's biggest kind of like recent crime stories, and he's been convicted and found guilty, I think, twice by juries now. Michael Bachelard is looking at that case and looking at recent developments in technology. He's unearthed some new evidence and suggesting that perhaps there's more to this case than initially meets the eye when you consider what's gone on in the last couple of decades. And I kind of want to give too much away because it is just a really fascinating thing to listen. There's a couple of episodes to go. It's one of the best true crime podcasts I've heard. Maybe my favorite true crime podcast coming out of Australia. Couldn't recommend it more. Trial by Water. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes, I am currently up to date. I listened to a lot of them when I was overseas. Recently came back from New York. Not sure if you guys know, but it's amazing. And also it's so good hearing Ruby's voice. Like occasionally they do the, like, you know, when they're traveling.
I know. I'm like the Leo guy
Yes.
pointing when it's like, I'm with my producer Ruby. I'm like,
I know. We miss you, Ruby. But yes, that is great. And I guess a natural segue. Mine is also a podcast this week, which is odd.
There you go.
I feel like we're really, if you like podcasts where it's just friends talking like this, then you will love the new podcast Where Everybody Knows Your Name with Ted Danson and Woody Harrelson. So, like, it's kind of, if you're a fan of Smartless, which I know, people are absolutely mad for, I find this one really funny. Obviously, these guys were friends and co-stars on Cheers, but it's not like a Cheers nostalgia pod. It's basically just the two of them. It's actually officially called Where Everybody Knows Your Name with Ted Danson and sometimes Woody Harrelson, because some episodes they just can't find him, which is like the most Woody Harrelson thing of all time. But basically, it's your classic, like they sit down, they catch up for a bit, and then each week they have a special guest. The guests are amazing. Eric Andre, Will Arnett, Kristen Bell, Jane Fonda. Like there's, the kind of roll call of Hollywood stars that they're obviously all friends with. But I've always been a big fan of those like kind of like talky podcasts where you get to see these really famous people in a context where they're all, obviously just like longtime friends chatting about their careers. So once you've listened to every single episode of The Drop and then Trial by Water, you are allowed to listen to Where Everybody Knows Your Name with Ted Danson and Woody Harrelson.
I will definitely take that up. I quite like Smartless, except I feel like when they have a guest who isn't funny, it's just quite a painful listen.
Yeah, I know, it can be. But Smartless has it's become this like huge monolith now and they're just so dominant. But I really like Smartless and this is in the same space.
Oh, great. I will listen to that. And then a surprise from me, I've got a book for this week. This one was a kind of random find because I didn't have a book to take home with me and I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. So I just picked this one up from my desk, which is kind of fun when you do that, right? When you
to be fair, you have 1,000
books.
books on your desk, so it's...
I know, but usually I like have a plan for the next book I'll read, and then I was just like, I'll give this one a go. It's called Hard by a Great Forest. It's by Leo Vardiashvili. It's a really funny first book. It's about a young man who leaves his home in Georgia with his brother and dad during Russia's occupation of South Ossetia. And then later on, he goes back to try and find his family, who have also gone back to try to resolve some stuff in their family past. It's a really great read, which is all about the country's troubled past, the traumas of war, home, family, belonging, all of those things, but really funny. And essentially it is a journey story. There's a quest that he embarks on. And also, I have not read much fiction about Georgia or set in Georgia. So I have been annoying everyone with fun facts about Georgia lately. But I think a good read. I think you would really like it too.
What's your funniest Georgia fact?
Funny feels wrong. More just a lot of war there. Okay.
They've been through a lot. I think they invented wine. The Georgians.
Yes, that actually, and there's quite a bit about the significance of wine. So I did actually say to my partner that we should get some Georgian wine over the weekend.
It's like a guilt thing.
Yeah, when I read, I go all in.
That's great. Well, to end the show, we have my conversation with Austin Butler, who stars in The Bikeriders. It depicts the rise and fall of an outlaw motorcycle club in America in the 1960s. The film also features Jodie Comer, Tom Hardy, and Mike Feist from Challengers. Austin and I spoke just after the film's Australian premiere at the Sydney Film Festival. The film is out next week on July 4th. Go watch it in the cinema. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Austin. Hey, Austin, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We're chatting just the morning after you attended the Sydney Film Festival premiere of The Bikeriders. How are you finding Sydney so far?
Well, I love Sydney. I've spent a lot of time here, and I love it here. Last night was really wet. I don't know if you saw it there last night, but I was.
Yeah, it's like a rain bomb apparently hitting.
By the time by the time I was doing interviews on the carpet, I was. It was as though I jumped in a swimming pool. In my suit.
I saw the photos. You looked great, man.
Oh, thank you.
You looked really good. Over the last couple of years, Austin, you've been in some incredibly big productions. I mean, just this year, June Part 2, Masters of the Air. Before that, Elvis, which you were obviously nominated for an Oscar in. The Bikeriders feels like a much more intimate film, a bit less flashy than some of those bigger scale productions. Can you tell me a little bit about your path to getting involved with this film? What was it that attracted you to this role?
Well, I mean, that's one of the elements of it is it felt different from some of the other things I've been doing. it was really Jeff Nichols. I've been a massive fan of his for a long time. I remember years ago doing a Jeff Nichols marathon at my house, just watching all of it.
Oh, wow.
And thinking, oh, if I could ever work with that guy, that'd be incredible. So when his script came across my doorstep, and I saw his name on it, and then I read it, and this whole world. I was a fan of Danny Lyon's photographs and his book, and then also this character. I mean, really, you know, I mean, to be completely straightforward, it was just one of the coolest characters I'd ever read, and I immediately was just drawn to him, and I thought how exciting that would be to embody him for the duration of filming.
Yeah, I'm interested in the characterization, because you mentioned Danny Lyon. The source material for the Bikeriders is this photo book that he released, and he's actually played in the movie by Mike Feist. The characters in the Bikeriders, or at least a lot of them, are real people. Is Benny, the character you played, based on one particular person, or is this a kind of amalgam or a collage of different people involved at the club at the time?
Yeah, no, he's based on a real person, and even like that, the motorcycle police chase. There's a real article, you know.
Oh wow, that was a real article you're reading out. They're reading out. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it really, like, the amount of stoplights or whatever that he went through, but the interesting thing about him is he was one of the few people in the club that Danny never was able to interview. So wow. There's no interview with him. You learn about him through what Kathy says about him. You learn about him through what other people say about him. The other thing is you never see his face in the book. You see him from behind on a motorcycle. You see him leaning over a pool table. So he's this enigma. He's this mystery. And then so I think as Jeff was crafting the story, the first things that he said to me were, he said, I see Benny as an empty glass that everybody wants to fill with their own expectations. And they want to put responsibilities on him, but he can't be filled. And so, yeah, so that was, it was fascinating to explore somebody who was such an enigma as him.
So how did you go about trying to fill out that character? It sounds like the lines are kind of drawn around him based on what we know from the book, from what, you know, the role that he played within that club. The movie, I think, like basically every piece of culture about motorcycle clubs after the 50s, it owes some of its look and feel to the Wild Ones. And one of the most iconic scenes is sort of mentioned and explicitly shown in the movie.
Yeah, what do you got?
Yeah. Getting to see you and Tom Hardy do that in the same 24 hours is very exciting for me. Is that kind of stuff, James Dean, is that a reference point, or were you drawing on something different as well?
I mean, I obviously have seen those films. I rewatched them when I was making this, just to see if anything sparked my imagination, you know, and also just to sort of study some of the filmmaking of Easy Rider or you know, The Loveless is another one of my favorite films, and seeing Willem Dafoe just be one of the coolest people ever on a motorcycle. And I watched all that, but I felt that for me it was getting together with people who their entire lives is motorcycles, and that's all they talk about, it's all they think about, and they know them inside and out. And so that's what I wanted to get in the headspace of. I wanted to get real grease under my fingernails, you know, and to learn how to take apart a motorcycle and feel that it was an extension of me in some way. So I was fortunate to all the bikers who let me into their world.
That's fascinating. Did you have much of a relationship with motorcycles prior to getting involved in this film?
I had a bit because my dad rode and my grandfather rode, but nothing like this.
Yeah, I'd say my granddad used to ride Triumphs in the 50s, and when I got old enough, I decided I wanted to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's when they shifted on the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
They switched it over in the 70s, I think.
Totally. It was one of the things I'm keen to talk to you about, the themes of the movie, but it was, I know this is not necessarily the point, but at the end of the film, I was just like, God damn, did a lot of that look really cool? Like, why aren't I in a motorcycle club?
Yeah. I mean, that was genuinely one of the draws of the film for me. It was just so damn cool. You know?
And did you get to do, I know that like, whether it's through insurance or just the way that films are made, a lot of things are done on rigs and stuff, but did you actually get on a bike and have some fun in the making of the film?
Yeah. I mean, besides a few close-ups, when Jody's on the bike, it's all me riding that motorcycle.
Oh, that's awesome.
Without a helmet on, you know, I mean, I don't know how we got the film insured necessarily. It's kind of a miracle. But yeah, that's why I trained so much before, and I trained for many months, so that way it was real, you know.
That's awesome. So over the course of the film, we kind of track this club. It starts out basically kind of like a community center for this group of men who are missing something, or maybe they're feeling a bit alienated or alone, or they've been rejected by these other institutions. Then things get a bit more sinister as the impacts of Vietnam, as an example, are felt on American society. What do you think it is about that period in America, that transition from the 60s to the 70s, that makes it such an interesting frame for storytelling like this?
Well, I think it's that it's you know, it's that fascinating thing with history, how you have the chaos of World War II, and then out of that comes this utopian, this facade of utopian 1950s white picket fence, that underneath, there's still trauma and relationships that are falling apart and all of that, but they're, it's being worn in this sort of Stepford Wives way. And then the counterculture of the 60s and the rebellion against that, is the pendulum swinging in the opposite direction. And then how that leads way to chaos at times, and destruction. And like you say, I mean, you have Vietnam and all the horrors of that and the trauma of that time, and then these soldiers coming back to the States and some of them not being treated well, and the insanity of that time and how tricky that time was, and the also the addictions shifting from alcohol, say, to heroin, and what that also does, and so it's a really volatile time, and so that sort of the chaos of that, I think, is quite dramatic. So I think that time period, the films of that time period, I think really mirror that.
I was also struck by, and I'm interested if you think that I'm like over reading or over interpreting the movie, feel free to push back on this. But when I was watching it, I felt there was this contemporary social resonance as well. These ideas, so much of our political conversation is around the anxieties of lonely, frustrated, maybe like angry men, their attempts to seek out some sort of catharsis and meaning similar to previous periods we've lived through. Yeah. Do you think the kinds of characters that we see in the Bikeriders, like we're still missing something as a society for these kinds of people to give them some more meaning?
I think that human nature is there's a universal element in human nature, and so I think that's why, regardless of time or place, you're going to have certain themes of the human condition. So I suppose that would be accurate.
I hadn't really thought about it until I was talking to you, but we're talking about a movie that is like a bit of a period piece. It's kind of been what you've done a lot of lately. Like, Elvis is a movie set in another period, Masters of the Air. Dune Part 2, obviously, like, not necessarily the 1950s. Yeah,
I made up for it by going way in the future with that one. Just bring the average down.
Yeah, it averages out somewhere in like 2100 or something like that. Yeah. Are you thinking about, are you curious about doing something that feels more contemporary? Or are you happy exploring these different times and worlds for the moment?
Yeah, it wasn't intentional, really. It's just these are the characters and filmmakers and stories that were the most compelling. at the time, but I always want to explore new things and challenge myself in different ways. And the next 2 films that I'm doing are more modern. So yeah,
exciting. One of my favorite up-and-coming Australian actors has a bit of screen time in this movie, Toby Wallace. I'm not sure if you guys are actually in scenes together, but did you get to know Toby at all?
Well, yeah, we got to hang out and we rode motorcycles together. And I love Toby. I spoke to him. We spoke this morning, but I loved him in Baby Teeth, which I thought was incredible. And
such a good film.
We have a lot of mutual friends, and so I was looking forward to meeting him. And we don't really have scenes together, I don't think, but we got to hang out, and I have really fond memories of looking over him. We late at night we rode motorcycles over this bridge in Cincinnati, and we were just racing over this bridge together, and that was a good memory that I have.
That's awesome. One of my favorite things about the Bikeriders is like this multi-generational that guy sort of thing going on. You know, Jeff Nichols loves work with Michael Shannon. He pops up in in an awesome role. You know, if you're there, you got another generation coming through. It was really cool to just see all this talent on screen at the same time.
Oh, that's so cool, yeah.
In terms of movies, just to question sort of a bit sideways to the Bikeriders specifically, there's a lot of conversation this year about the state of the box office and where things are going. I mean, June again is a really big, massive success, but there's been a couple of films that probably didn't hit the way people were expecting. A lot of audiences seem more keen to wait for things to hit streaming for whatever reason. Is this something you think about? Like, you were all worried about the trajectory of cinemas and if audiences are going to go and see these things in that sort of environment?
It's something I think about a lot. I was speaking about it at dinner last night. Just, I love the experience personally of going to the movies. I love it deeply. And I have such a nostalgia of going with my parents as a kid and the smell of popcorn, and sitting down and the lights going down and communing with strangers and immersing yourself in this film. And I also love the experience of putting your phone away and actually being present for the duration of a film. And so I think there's nothing like that where you don't have distractions and you're allowing yourself to disappear for a bit into this other world. And but like you say, it definitely, you notice a difference in what gets people to actually go out to the theater now. And I hope that more people, well, I just hope it stays alive. You know, I really love the experience so much, and I know so many people do. And so I hope it really, you know, I don't even know what it is. I kind of wanted to say for a second, like, I hope it has a resurgence or like something.
Yeah.
But I think people are still, for certain films, people still are really going. I mean, look at Barbie and Oppenheimer, and
Absolutely,
I mean, Dune was that was amazing to see everybody come out for that, but you never know, so I hope people really come out. What do you think?
Oh, man, I agree. I mean, Barbie and Oppenheimer, it feels like got people excited, and then I don't know whether it was the combination of the strikes or just like, you know, the economy or whatever it is going on and a couple of things being shifted out of schedule. But I think it would be so sad if we didn't have that collective experience. To me, going to the films with one another is great. I mean, I think the Bikeriders, you can watch that at home, but watching that, hearing that sound, that experience, not being distracted, I think, like you said, putting your phone away, such an important part of what this art form is about.
Yeah. It's an important part of being human as well. It's like there's something in, I always think about, because there's always these questions of like, what's the sort of meaning behind, you know, how you spend your time and whatnot. And I think of how, you know, there's something in the human condition where we've been telling stories around campfire since the dawn of time. And so to have that experience where you're not just constantly being distracted by a 7-second video and going on to the next thing. Yeah. actually, taking in a story, I think is something that speaks to the soul in some way.
Austin, thank you so much for your time, man. It's a perfect note to end it
Thank
on.
you.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you for your time.
This episode of The Drop was produced by Chi Wong. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode of The Drop, make sure to follow us in your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, or better yet, share the episode with a friend. I'm Osman Faruqi. See you next week.